Do you have toxic family drama this holiday season? If you do, you're not alone, because it is a tale as old as time. And one shining example of that is between Queen Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots. Two cousins, two queens, and one beheads the other. Their family drama is some of the greatest of all time. So welcome to the story of Queen Elizabeth I. This is the third part, so we've already talked about her getting accused of killing her boyfriend's wife and her ascending to the throne, so go back and watch those if you missed it. And we're finally at the part that everyone's been waiting for, so let's discuss. And it's about to get real Catholic and real Protestant and jump around a lot, so stay with me. Elizabeth is the Queen of England, and she gets a little knock-knock on the door, and it's Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary's on the run from the Scottish, and she's looking to seek shelter from Elizabeth. And if you're like, why would the Queen of Scots be on the run from the Scottish? Great question, and I'm going to give you the fastest backstory I possibly can on Mary. So the Tudor dynasty starts with King Henry VII. And out of his 3 kids that made it to adulthood, he has an oldest daughter, Margaret, and then King Henry VIII, which are the 2 we're going to focus on. Margaret gets married off to King James IV of Scotland. Henry is married off to the Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. And these marriages were meant to create a lot of peace in between the nations. And pretty much as soon as King Henry VIII is king, he's like, fuck all that, we ball, and he invades one of Scotland's allies, so Scotland invades England. And because King Henry VIII is away, Catherine of Aragon is in charge of England, and she fucks up the invading Scottish, killing King James and widowing Margaret, which then made their 1-year-old son, King James V. He grows up, and Scotland is a ride during this time, but then he dies and leaves his 6-day-old daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots, in charge of Scotland. So that's how we got there with Mary. With Elizabeth, I mean, there's a whole playlist on it, but basically, Henry has a daughter, divorces his wife, marries someone else, and then has Elizabeth, and then executes Elizabeth's mom and names Elizabeth illegitimate, marries someone else, has a son, makes the son the heir, the son dies, so then the oldest daughter takes the throne, and then she dies, and then Elizabeth takes the throne. Above all else, Mary, Queen of Scots is Catholic, and Elizabeth is a Protestant. And because a lot of the Catholics do not support Elizabeth's claim to the throne and still feel like she's an illegitimate, they would rather throw their weight behind Mary, Queen of Scots, which of course creates a bit of an unspoken rivalry between the cousins. But okay, back to the story. So Mary, Queen of Scots was briefly Queen of France, but when her king husband died, she went back to Scotland. When she got back to Scotland, a lot of the council was really sketched out and threatened by her. So Mary, Queen of Scots is writing to Elizabeth hoping that she can just come on over to England and avoid all this Scottish bullshit. And Elizabeth is like, interesting. I could bring Mary, Queen of Scots here and marry her off to my favorite, Robert Dudley, and then that way I can keep an eye on her and make sure she doesn't spark a rebellion, since all these Catholics can't seem to keep her name out of their mouth. Mary, Queen of Scots was like, oh, gross, fuck all that, and she marries her cousin instead. And this is particularly annoying for Elizabeth because the cousin she marries is also a grandchild of Margaret Tudor, since after Margaret's first husband got slain in battle, she remarried and had more kids that have a claim to the Tudor line. So this marriage between Mary, Queen of Scots and her cousin is a direct threat to Elizabeth. She already has a shaky claim to the throne in a lot of people's eyes, basically just holding on by the words in her dad's will, since she was A, conceived out of wedlock, and B, legally declared illegitimate by the king. Then Mary, Queen of Scots and her husband do the one thing that Elizabeth does not want them to do. They create an heir, a little super tutor, King James VI of Scotland. And then Mary's husband gets blown up, Mary gets arrested, and she flees to England. Mary's hoping that the support of the English queen will help her regain the Scottish throne. But Elizabeth is like, no. Girl, I'm not sticking my neck out for you. And then because Mary, Queen of Scots is in England, a rebellion starts. And then once that rebellion is soiled, Elizabeth executes like 200 Catholic people. But of course, killing hundreds of them only increased the passion of the Catholics and kind of made Elizabeth look like an asshole. And in 1570, the Pope responds by basically telling all the English Catholics, you don't need to listen to that queen. God said she sucks. And God wouldn't give a shit if you killed her. So Elizabeth hearing this sets up like an Elizabethan Secret Service situation to protect her from Catholic plots. And instead of helping Mary, Queen of Scots, she imprisons her. And then after almost 2 decades in prison, Elizabeth has Mary killed. Elizabeth tried to claim that she didn't actually want Mary, Queen of Scots executed. She's like, I signed the death warrant, but then I tried to take it back, and then my help just took it out of the desk, and it was like very theatrical. And people are like, okay, if you didn't want her killed, why did you sign the death warrant? And she has no answer to that. So she fails to skirt the backlash, and the backlash is crazy. Spain is beyond pissed, since this whole time they've been in support of Mary, Queen of Scots overthrowing Elizabeth. So her and Spain are enemies, and around this time, Spain teams up with France to invade the Netherlands. And since those are Elizabeth's allies, she sends some men to back up the Dutch. But her men are not much help, and Spain fucks up the Dutch, and she had left Robert Dudley in charge of this little mission, so he resigns in disgrace. And with that little victory under their belt, the Pope sends Spain to go fuck up Elizabeth. He's like, Philip, I need you to go take her ass out and rule England yourself. So he takes the Spanish Armada, his fleet of warships, towards England. And when the first Spanish ship is spotted, Elizabeth is like, baby, we're playing offense. She sends her men to go raid the Spanish ship. And they're playing real-life battleships in the deep blue sea. And in July 1588, Spain collects like 50,000-ish men to come invade England. And they battle it out for 2 weeks. Spain plans on just overwhelming the Crumpet capital, since England is outmanned, outgunned, and some of these ships are just some dude's fishing boat. However, England's done a lot of investing in their boats, and their boats might be smaller, but they're much faster and more maneuverable. And they start getting the better of these Spanish ships, so Spain retreats backwards to wait for the rest of their fleet. And England says, offense! And they team up with the Dutch to night attack the Spanish ships. Spain tries to flee, but the water is crazy, and they end up getting shipwrecked along the coast of Scotland on the rocks. And after Spain takes this ass whooping, they kind of just take themselves back home to think about what they did. But England's not sure if they've actually retreated or if this is just a trick, so Elizabeth and Robert Dudley ride out to talk to their boys. And she gives that infamous speech about having a weak and feeble body, but the heart and the stomach of a king. And the troops are loving it. They are pumped up to drown some Spanish guys. But the battle was over, and they won. Well, they won that battle. The Anglo-Spanish War is very, very long and violent, and it is just a different story. This story is about Queen Elizabeth pulling off one of England's greatest naval victories. And it's a W, but that shit was expensive. Plus, the Irish are refusing to pay taxes again, and the crops have been asked. So now the economy is going bad, and basically all of her friends and advisors are dead because she is ancient for the time period. And her main man and bestie, Robert Dudley, died pretty much immediately after that whole Spanish Armada thing. So she's deeply depressed about that, and she keeps his picture in the last letter he wrote her in a box next to her bed. And then she's kind of just in her soft girl era. She doesn't want to work. She just stays in her room all sad. And then the aging queen becomes friends with Robert Dudley's stepson, who I'm pretty sure is her cousin's biological kid. But she's fond of that dude, and she gives him a bunch of jobs at court, which he fails at repeatedly. One of those jobs was a battle in Ireland where he lost like 11,000 of Elizabeth's men, and she was so pissed at him. And he gets it in his head that he can have the queen forgive him if he just gets a chance to talk to her. So he goes to the palace to talk to Elizabeth. He goes to her room, he walks in, and Elizabeth is not dressed. She's standing there bald-headed in her nightgown, and she freaks the fuck out. And if that's not embarrassing enough for Elizabeth, he thinks it's funny, and he tells everyone, oh my god, I walked in on the queen and she's hideous. And Elizabeth is like, dog, fuck you, and she puts him on house arrest and takes away all the sweet perks she had given him. So then he tries to start a mini rebellion against her, and she just kills him. But she's had a long, hard life of loss, and she mourns his death for like a year. And at this point, Elizabeth's council just wants her to name an heir and step aside. And so they go behind Elizabeth's back, and they write to Mary, Queen of Scots' son, King James VI, and they tell him exactly what to say when he writes to Elizabeth asking to be her heir. And so King James and Queen Elizabeth have a nice, lovely, cousinly relationship, and she goes on to name James her heir. And then the 69-year-old Elizabeth gets a fever and a cold, and her mouth just starts getting covered in sores. She has no energy, and she lays on her bedroom floor for weeks, refusing to go to bed. And then on March 24th, 1603, at the age of 69, after ruling England for 44 years, Elizabeth died and ended the Tudor line. Well, the Henry VIII Tudor line. And King James VI of Scotland also becomes King James I of England, solidifying Scotland and England just like King Henry VII had envisioned when he first married Margaret and James. And that's the story of Queen Elizabeth I. Her legacy stands mostly on the first 25 years of her reign, and we just don't discuss the last 15. Let's just focus on the Golden Age. And now that I have told you the story of King Henry through the eyes of his wives and his children, the only thing left to do is tell you his story through my eyes. So if you want to hear that story, I'll see you in the next one.